His hands touched my chin, lifting it with a slowness that felt like a challenge. I could smell leather, tobacco, and something else, something you can't describe, only fear. His eyes were as dark as if they held storms, and when he turned to the crowd, his voice cut through the air like a blade. No one steps on what is mine. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're watching from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The first time I heard laughter behind my back, the sound was like a shattered mirror, each shard cutting a piece of what I still called pride. I was kneeling on the marble floor, my skirt stained with spilled wine, my hands trembling as the red liquid ran between my fingers like blood from a wound I couldn't name. "Stay on the floor, that's your place," they said. And the echo of those words seeped into me like an acidic perfume, penetrating every pore, every breath, every beat of the heart that insisted on continuing even when everything in me screamed to stop. No one tried to help me. The ladies watched with looks of disguised pity and mouths twisted in satisfaction, as if my humiliation were the spectacle they had waited for all night. I was the intruder, the bastard brought to serve the house that had never accepted me, the living mistake of a father who sired me and then pretended I didn't exist. The entire hall seemed to breathe against me. The lights from the chandeliers flickered, casting long shadows on the golden walls, as if the place itself delighted in the humiliation. I felt the heat rise from the cold floor, the mixture of shame and anger pulsing under my skin like a fever with no cure. Their laughter was the chorus of a court without clemency, without appeal, without mercy. I didn't cry, not in front of them. I swallowed the lump growing in my throat and let the silence rise like armor, fragile and transparent, but it was all I had. My story began long before that night. I was born on the threshold between two worlds, the daughter of a lord who acknowledged me just enough not to let me starve, but never enough to give me a name worth anything. My mother was a maid, a woman with calloused hands and tired eyes who died when I was 7, taking with her the only hugs I would ever know. I was raised in the back hallways between the kitchen and the laundry, learning to be invisible, not to take up space, not to make noise. The other children of the house, the legitimate ones, played in the gardens while I carried buckets of water. They wore silk dresses while I mended my rags. And when they looked at me, it was always with that mix of curiosity and contempt, as if I were an exotic and repugnant animal at the same time. At 15, my father died. The widow, a woman with a sharp face and an even sharper heart, kept me out of obligation but made sure I knew my place. "You eat because I allow it, you sleep because I allow it, you breathe because I haven't decided to send you away yet," she would say, and each word was a stone thrown upon my chest. I learned to walk close to the walls, to lower my eyes when someone passed, to disappear. But inside, something in me refused to break completely. There was a spark, small and stubborn, that insisted on believing my life could be more than this. When the house received the invitation to the ball at the Alpha King's court, a frenzy took over everything. The legitimate daughters spent weeks choosing dresses, rehearsing dances, practicing smiles. I was summoned to help, to carry, to serve. On the day of the ball, they were radiant, perfumed, covered in jewels. I was in my best dress, which still looked like a rag compared to theirs. My role was clear: stay in the shadows, serve wine, don't draw attention. But fate or chance, or perhaps something crueler, had other plans. It was in the middle of the night, when the hall was buzzing with music and conversation, that everything fell apart. One of the ladies, the cruelest of all, called me to serve her table. As I approached with the tray of glasses, she purposefully, discreetly stuck out her foot, and I tripped. The tray slipped from my hands, the glasses shattered on the floor, the wine spread like a bloodstain on the white marble. The silence that followed was deafening. All eyes turned to me, and then came the laughter, that laughter that cut like glass. I remember the sound of footsteps before I saw him. The murmuring ceased. That silence wasn't natural. It was an abyss opened by power. When I lifted my eyes, he was already there, the Alpha King. The man everyone spoke of in whispers and reverence, as if saying his name aloud was an act of recklessness. His presence seemed to bend the air, making it dense, hard to breathe. Tall, wrapped in a calm that hurt more than a scream, he walked slowly, each movement measured, his steel-like gaze sweeping the hall until it rested on me. And when our eyes met, I felt something I had never felt before. Fear and fascination intertwined so intensely that I couldn't distinguish one from the other. For a moment, no one breathed. The sound of his boots against the marble sounded like a death sentence or salvation. I didn't know which. When he stopped before me, I smelled the scent of leather, tobacco, and something more, something you can't describe, only fear. His eyes were dark, deep, as if they held storms that had never been unleashed. And in them was an intensity that stripped me of any pretense, of any mask. "Who told you to kneel?" His voice was deep, unhurried, but it carried a weight that made the walls tremble. "I tripped, sir," I murmured, my head still bowed, my voice coming out shaky and small. A whisper went through the hall, but he didn't look away. His hand touched my chin, lifting it with a slowness that felt like both a challenge and an intimacy. "Look at me," he ordered, and I obeyed. And the whole world disappeared for an instant. There was no more hall, no more laughing ladies, no more shame. There were only those dark eyes holding me like hot irons. He then turned to the crowd and, in a tone that cut through the air like a sharp blade, said, "No one steps on what is mine." The murmur turned into contained chaos. I heard the sound of held breaths, of poorly disguised indignation, of palpable fear. He lifted me with a restrained strength, and I felt the heat of his hand through the fabric of my dress, marking my skin like a brand. There was something possessive in that gesture, something that frightened and attracted me at the same time. But there was also a protection I didn't understand, that made no sense. When he set me on my feet, I realized the entire hall was watching us. The king and the bastard, absolute power and the unwanted stain. And yet, none of them dared to speak. The ladies retreated, the low voices began to simmer again, but now with a different tone, a tone of fear and resentment. Someone laughed nervously, and the sound died in the air before it could finish. I could feel the stares like knives in my back, but he didn't care. He looked at me as if I were the only real thing in that world of masks and lies. "You belong in this place," he said. And his voice, though cold, sounded like a sentence of reversal, as if he were rewriting the world's rules with that single phrase. "No, sir, I don't belong anywhere." The answer escaped before I could contain it, before reason stopped me from speaking. It was a confession, a naked truth I had never said aloud. A corner of his mouth lifted, something between irony and fascination. "Then create your own, but on your feet." After that night, nothing was the same. The castle whispered my name like an indecent secret, like a forbidden word everyone wanted to say but feared the consequences. The maids looked at me with fear, the ladies with hatred, and the men with an undue curiosity that made me feel even more exposed. Everyone wanted to know why the Alpha King, so relentless, so distant, so above everyone, had defended me. None of them understood that he hadn't done it for me. He had done it for himself. Or perhaps for something that had been troubling him since, something I couldn't name but could feel in the air whenever he was near. I spent days avoiding his presence, but it was impossible to ignore him. He would appear in the narrow corridors when I least expected it, on the wind-swept balconies where I went for a moment of peace, in the reflections of mirrors as if he were a shadow haunting me. He didn't speak, just watched me, and that silence was worse than any word. I tried to hide the trembling of my hands when I felt his gaze upon me, but I knew he noticed. He noticed everything. He didn't need to touch me to disarm me. It was enough for him to be there, occupying the same space, breathing the same air. One night, as rain hammered against the stained glass windows with an almost human fury, I was summoned to the library. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would burst from my chest. The flames in the fireplace cast a reddish light on the books, on the dark velvet-lined walls, on him. He was leaning against the desk, sleeves rolled up, his face tired. But his eyes remained dangerous, alert, like a predator that never completely let its guard down. "Do you think I understand what you've done to me?" he asked, and the question caught me off guard. "I've done nothing, sir," I replied, my voice weak, insecure. "Exactly," he answered. And the silence that followed was so thick it felt palpable, almost solid. I could feel it pressing on my chest, stealing my breath. I knew then that what was growing between us wasn't tenderness, not love in the soft, gentle sense of the word. It was a storm. It was the kind of thing that destroys before it builds, that burns before it warms. He was the kind of man who refuses to be moved, who doesn't allow anything to take him out of control. And yet, something in him was already leaning, already yielding in a way he himself didn't understand. And I was the kind of woman who should never have been seen, much less lifted, much less desired. The following days were a minefield of glances and whispers. The ladies began to plot openly, the gossip multiplied like weeds, and soon the story of my undue rise echoed in every corridor, every room, every corner of the castle. They called me a usurper, an ambitious servant who had bewitched the king with dark arts. They said I was a witch, that I had sold my soul to get ahead, that I was destroying the natural order of things. He said nothing about the rumors. He merely watched, with a gaze that burned everything it touched and a silence that crushed any attempt at rebellion. But I knew it couldn't last. I knew the tension was reaching a breaking point, that something had to give. And it did at the harvest ball, when autumn had already painted the trees gold and red, when the air had that scent of an end and a beginning at the same time. The hall was packed, the air heavy with expensive perfume and cheap falsehood. The same mouths that had insulted me now smiled, polite and venomous, waiting for my stumble. I was supposed to serve the wine, as always, but one of the ladies, the cruelest of them all, the one who had started it all on that first night, subtly pushed me as I passed her. The tray fell. The glasses shattered on the floor with a sound that seemed to echo for all eternity. The liquid stained my dress, my hands, my face. The laughter returned, cruel, precise, as if it had been rehearsed. "Stay on the floor, that's your place," she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Before I could react, before I could decide whether to stay there or to run away and never return, he stood up. Silence fell like a stone in water, spreading waves of fear and anticipation. The Alpha King crossed the hall, each step sending a collective shudder through the crowd. He stopped in front of me and, without looking away from the woman who had insulted me, without even blinking, said only, "I've warned you. No one steps on what is mine." That sentence, spoken between the clinking of broken glasses and the astonished silence of hundreds of people, destroyed more reputations than any scandal ever had. He extended his hand to me, large, strong, firm. And I, covered in wine, trembling with fear and something more, accepted it. The entire hall watched us, petrified, as he led me to the center, not as a servant, not as a subject, but as an equal. And in that moment, under the weight of all those stares, I knew my life would never be the same. I don't know if in that instant he freed me or condemned me, but I know that from then on, the floor no longer recognized me. And, in a way, neither did the king himself. In the days that followed, the court was in an uproar. The rumors turned into heated debates, the whispers into open conversations. Some nobles began to question the king's authority, others defended him blindly, but everyone agreed on one thing. I was the problem. The bastard who had seduced the most powerful man in the kingdom, who had subverted the order, who had placed herself where she shouldn't be. I received anonymous threats, notes left under my door, looks that promised revenge. But he continued to protect me almost obsessively, as if I were a treasure he guarded jealously. One afternoon, as I walked through the gardens trying to escape the weight of the stairs inside the castle, I heard voices behind a hedge. It was two ladies talking quietly but not quietly enough. "She needs to disappear," one said. "The king is blind, he's lost his mind. He's going to destroy everything for that creature." The other agreed. "We need to make her understand she doesn't belong here. Maybe an accident. Something to make her go back to where she never should have left." My blood ran cold. For a moment I considered telling the king, but something stopped me. Pride, perhaps. Or fear of seeming weak, of confirming what everyone already thought of me. So I decided I would face it alone. I started to walk more carefully, to test my food before eating, to lock my door at night. But the fear was constant, a shadow that followed me with every step. It was on a full moon night that it all almost ended. I was coming back from the stables where I had gone to see the horses, the only place I still felt at peace. The path was dark, lit only by the moon. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me, fast, approaching. Before I could turn, I felt hands shoving me hard. I fell onto the stone ground, the pain exploding in my shoulder. I heard muffled laughter, voices I couldn't identify. When I tried to get up, one of them pushed me again, harder, and my head hit the stone. I saw stars. The world spun. And then through the fog of pain, I heard a voice I knew. This is a warning. Next time, you won't be so lucky. They ran off, leaving me there, bleeding and dizzy. I tried to get up, but my legs wouldn't obey. It was then that I heard other footsteps, heavier, firmer. A figure approached, large, imposing. It was him. I don't know how he knew where I was. I don't know if he had followed me or if it was just fate rolling its dice once more. But when he saw me on the ground, when he saw the blood running from my temple, something in his face changed. The mask of control fell for an instant, and what I saw behind it was both terrifying and fascinating. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice so low and dangerous it seemed to make the trees tremble. "I didn't see," I lied, because I knew that if I told, he would do something terrible, something that couldn't be undone. He lifted me into his arms as if I weighed nothing, as if I were made of feathers and not flesh and bone. I felt the warmth of his body through his clothes, the steady rhythm of his heart against my ear. And for the first time since all this had begun, I allowed myself to feel something other than fear. I allowed myself to feel safe. He took me to his chambers, not mine. He called the doctor, stayed by my side as he treated my wounds, held my hand when the pain became unbearable. And when we were finally alone, when the doctor had left and silence enveloped us, he said something that changed everything. "You won't sleep alone anymore. You'll stay here, where I can protect you." "I'm not your responsibility," I protested weakly. "You are my choice," he replied, and there was no argument that could contradict that. That night, I fell asleep in a bed that wasn't mine, in a room that smelled of him, wrapped in sheets that still held his warmth, and for the first time in my life, I felt at home. The days that followed were strange and intense. I lived in his chambers, slept in his room, although he never tried to touch me more than necessary. There was a tension between us that grew each day, an invisible current that pulled us toward each other but that he refused to fully cross. I didn't understand why. I didn't understand what was stopping him, what made him pull back whenever our eyes met for too long, whenever I sensed he was about to say or do something that would change everything between us. One night, while a storm raged outside, I finally found out. We were alone in the library, he reading documents, I pretending to read a book while I was actually watching him. Suddenly, he looked up and caught me staring. For a long moment, no one said anything. Then he closed the documents, stood up, and came to where I was. He stood so close I could feel the heat of his body, the scent that was already familiar to me. "Do you know why I hesitate?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Because once I touch you, once I cross this line, there's no going back. You will become mine in every sense, and I don't know if you're ready for what that means. I don't know if you understand what it is to belong to someone like me." "And what are you?" I asked, my heart beating so hard I thought he could hear it. He smiled, but it was a joyless smile, a smile that held pain and something darker. "A man who destroys what he loves," he said. "A man who doesn't know how to be gentle, who doesn't know how to back down, who doesn't know how to lose. If you give yourself to me, there will be no escape. You will be mine, and I will be your tormentor and your protector at the same time." I should have been afraid. I should have backed away, asked to leave, to go back to being invisible as before. But something in me, something stubborn and self-destructive, wanted to get even closer. "Then give me a reason to back away," I said, and my voice came out firmer than I expected. "Give me a reason to be afraid of you." He looked at me for a long moment, his dark eyes scanning my face as if trying to memorize every detail. Then, slowly, dangerously, he raised his hand and touched my face. The touch was soft, almost reverent, but there was an intensity in it that made me tremble. "I have no reasons to offer you," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I only have truths, and the truth is, since that night, since I saw you on the floor covered in wine and humiliation, something in me woke up. Something I thought was long dead, and now I can't make it silent." His fingers slid across my face, down my neck, leaving a trail of fire. I closed my eyes, letting myself feel, finally allowing myself to admit what I had denied for so long. I felt it too. I felt that forbidden attraction, that desire that made no sense but consumed everything. When I opened my eyes again, he was even closer, so close our lips almost touched. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, and I could feel his warm breath against my mouth. "Tell me to stop, and I will." I couldn't. I couldn't say the words that would save me. So instead, I did what my heart had been screaming for me to do from the beginning. I closed that last millimeter and kissed him. The world exploded. There was no other word for it. It was as if everything we had repressed, everything we had denied, was finally unleashed at once. His hands pulled me to him with a force that stole my breath. His lips took mine with a hunger that was both desperate and calculated. There was no gentleness in that kiss. There was need, possession, something primordial that consumed us. He lifted me, placed me on the library table, and positioned himself between my legs. His hands were everywhere, in my hair, on my face, at my waist, holding me as if I would disappear if he let go. And I gave myself to him completely, without reservation, without fear. Because in that moment, nothing else mattered. It didn't matter what others thought. It didn't matter what would happen next. All that mattered was that moment, that kiss, that connection that united us in a way that went beyond the physical. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless, trembling. He rested his forehead on mine, his eyes closed, his hands still holding me as if I were the only real thing in the entire world. "Now you're mine," he said, his voice hoarse and definitive. "Forever. And God help anyone who tries to take you from me." That night, our relationship changed irreversibly. We didn't talk about what had happened. We didn't need to. There was a silent understanding between us, a line that had been crossed and could not be uncrossed. When we lay down that night, he pulled me into his arms, wrapping me with a possessiveness that should have scared me, but, strangely, made me feel protected. But the outside world didn't disappear just because our inner world had changed. The next day, when I left the king's chambers, the looks I received were even worse. The ladies no longer even bothered to hide their hatred. The nobles looked at me with open contempt. But now something was different. Now I had allies, even if they were few. Some people, seeing the king's determination to protect me, began to treat me with respect, even if it was only out of fear of angering him. It was during a council meeting that the real battle began. I wasn't supposed to be there, but the king insisted I stay. The nobles protested, saying it was improper, that I was just a bastard with no title. "She stays," was all he said, and his tone allowed no argument. We spent hours debating policies, alliances, issues I barely understood. But I watched, and I learned. And when one of the councillors proposed an alliance that would involve the king's marriage to a princess from another kingdom, I felt my heart sink. The silence that followed was heavy. Everyone looked at the king, waiting for his answer. He looked at me, and in his gaze was something I couldn't quite decipher. Then, turning to the council, he said calmly, "There will be no marriage. The throne has its queen." The chaos was instantaneous. Nobles stood up, shouting protests, saying it was unacceptable, that he couldn't marry a bastard, that he was destroying the dynasty. But he remained motionless, his eyes fixed on me, completely ignoring the turmoil around him. When silence finally returned, forced by his mere presence, he said, "Does anyone else have something to say?" No one answered. That night, in his chambers, I finally let the tears fall. Tears of relief, of fear, of love. Because yes, I loved him. I loved that impossible, relentless man who had lifted me from the floor and placed me by his side, defying the entire world. "You don't have to do this," I said, my voice broken. "You don't have to make me a queen. I don't want your throne, I just want you." He pulled me into his arms, buried his face in my hair. "You'll have both," he said, his voice firm. "Because I don't know how to live without you anymore. And if the world doesn't accept it, then we'll face the world together." The months that followed were a roller coaster of emotions. There were attempts at sabotage, even more venomous rumors, even a conspiracy to kill me that was discovered and brutally suppressed. But through it all, he was by my side. He taught me about politics, about governing, about how to navigate that world of intrigue and masks. And I learned. I learned fast. Because if I was going to be queen, I would be a queen no one would ever forget. The coronation was set for the spring. In the days leading up to it, I received intensive training on etiquette, history, and protocols. But the most important part, the hardest part, was learning to see myself differently. to stop being the invisible bastard and become the queen. It was a painful process of deconstruction and reconstruction. There were nights when I doubted, when I wanted to run away, to go back to being nobody. But he was always there, reminding me of who I was, of what I had become. The eve of the coronation was the longest night of my life. I couldn't sleep, my mind spiraling with anxiety. He noticed, obviously. He came to bed, wrapped me in his arms. "Are you afraid?" he asked. "I'm terrified," I admitted. "What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail?" "Then we'll fail together," he said simply. "And we'll start over. But you won't fail. You're stronger than you think, braver, and tomorrow the world will see it." Coronation Day dawned clear and bright, as if even the sky was celebrating. The cathedral was packed, hundreds of people waiting to see the bastard become queen. When I entered, in the most beautiful dress I had ever worn, with my head held high and my heart beating like a war drum, I felt all eyes on me. Some with hostility, others with curiosity, a few with something that looked like hope. I walked down the endless aisle to where he waited. My king, my protector, my love. When I knelt before the altar, when I felt the weight of the crown being placed on my head, when I heard the ancient words declaring me queen, something inside me transformed for good. I was no longer the invisible girl. I was no longer the bastard on the floor. I was the queen, and no one would ever make me forget it. The celebration that followed was grand, but I barely remember the details. I remember dancing with him, feeling his pride in every touch, in every look. I remember seeing the same ladies who had humiliated me now, bowing before me. I remember feeling a deep satisfaction not for revenge, but for justice, because I had proven not just to them, but to myself that I was worthy, that my birth did not define my destiny. That night, in our room when we were finally alone, he kissed me with a tenderness I didn't expect. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Against all odds, you did it. We did it," I corrected, because that wasn't just my victory. It was ours. And it always would be. The years that followed were not easy. There were challenges, revolts, moments when our union was tested. But through it all, we remained together. Two survivors who had found in each other something they didn't even know they were looking for. I had children, 3 in total, each carrying within them their father's strength and their mother's resilience. I saw the kingdom prosper. I saw changes I never imagined possible. But above all, I learned something fundamental, that true love isn't gentle or easy. It's fierce. It's a daily choice. It's looking at someone and deciding every day that they are worth fighting for. And I fought, we fought, and we won. Today, when I look back at that girl kneeling on the floor covered in wine, I can barely recognize her. But I know she's still here, somewhere inside me. She is the foundation upon which I've built everything I've become. And for that I am grateful. Grateful for the pain, for the humiliation, for the suffering. Because it was through them that I found my strength. And it was through the darkness that I found my light. The Alpha King, my husband, my king, still looks at me with that intensity that disarms me. He still holds me as if I might disappear. He still protects me with a ferocity that scares others. And I still tremble when he touches me, still feel that chill down my spine when our eyes meet. Because what we have isn't a fairy tale. It's real, raw, imperfect. And for that very reason, it's perfect for us. If there's one thing I've learned on this entire journey, it's that it doesn't matter where you start. What matters is who you decide to be. It matters the choices you make, the battles you choose to fight, the people you choose to stand by. I could have accepted my place on the floor. I could have remained invisible, forgotten. But I chose to stand up. I chose to fight. And that choice changed everything. So, to you who are listening, who have followed this story from the beginning, I leave you with this message. Do not let anyone define your worth. Do not accept the limitations that others try to impose on you. And above all, do not be afraid to fight for what you deserve, because life is too short to live on your knees. It's time to stand up. If this story touched your heart in any way, if you identified with the struggle, the pain, the victory, leave your comment below telling us what you felt. Every word from you means the world to me. And if you're not yet part of this community, Don't forget to like and subscribe because we have many other stories to share, other journeys to live together. Your presence here makes all the difference, and I look forward to continuing to tell stories that move, that inspire, that remind us of the strength that exists within each of us. May we all find our crown, even if we start on the floor. May we all have the courage to get up, no matter how many times we are knocked down. And may we always remember that we deserve to be on our feet, with our heads held high, looking the world in the eye and saying, I am more than you imagine. But life, I discovered, has a cruel way of testing us just when we think we have finally found peace. It was in the 3rd year of my reign that the real storm arrived. It began with whispers about the king's sister, a woman I didn't know existed, who had been living in exile in the mountains since before I met him. It was said that she was the rightful heir to the throne, that she had been sent away for reasons no one dared to speak of clearly. And now, after years of silence, she was returning. I remember the day he told me. We were in the garden, I pregnant with our 2nd child, my belly already prominent under my dress. He looked older that day, tired in a way that went beyond the physical. I need to tell you something, he said. And for the first time since we had met, I saw real fear in his eyes. I have a sister. She was sent away when we were young by my father's decision. There are rumors she is returning, and when she does, she will bring war. I felt the ground move beneath my feet. Why was she sent away? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked away, and that gesture told me everything I needed to know. There were secrets there, old and dangerous secrets. Because she questioned the succession. Because she had the support of half the council, because my father feared she would dethrone him. So he sent her away, to a castle in the mountains, under the pretext of protecting her from a supposed threat. She swore revenge. And now, with my father dead and me on the throne, she comes to claim what she believes is hers by right. Her arrival was like an eclipse, blocking out all light. Lady Morgana, they called her, a woman of icy beauty and eyes that cut like glass. She entered the castle with an entourage of 50 warriors, all loyal only to her. The entire hall bowed as she passed, and I felt a pang of jealousy and fear. She was everything I was not. Born with a silver spoon, trained from childhood to rule, with pure blood running in her veins. When our eyes met for the first time, it was as if 2 predators were sizing each other up. She looked me up and down, and the contempt in her gaze was palpable. So you're the bastard who stole my throne, she said, her voice as sweet as poisoned honey. I stole nothing, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the fear I felt. I was chosen by the king and crowned by the people, she laughed, a humorless sound. Chosen by a king who has always been too weak to face the consequences of his decisions. But that will change soon. That night, the entire castle was on high alert. The councillors were divided, some openly supporting Morgana, others remaining loyal to us, but with a fragile loyalty. I felt for the first time since my coronation that everything I had achieved could crumble. He held me that night, but even in his arms I felt the distance. There was something he wasn't telling me, something about Morgana that weighed on him like a curse. The following days were a silent battle. Morgana settled into the castle as if it were hers, changing decorations, dismissing servants, meeting with nobles I thought were my allies. I saw my authority being slowly eroded like water on stone. I tried to maintain my composure to continue governing, but it was difficult when every decision I made was questioned, every order ignored or delayed. It was during a formal dinner that she finally showed her true intentions. The table was filled with nobles, all watching the spectacle they knew was coming. Morgana raised her glass and with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, proposed a toast. To the true queen, she said, and the ambiguity of the phrase made a blade-like silence fall. Some toasted, others hesitated. I remained still, watching, learning who my true allies were. Then she continued, her voice clear and calculated. It's fascinating how a servant can sit on the throne and pretend she belongs there. But blood is blood, isn't it? And royal blood cannot be diluted by whims of the heart. I felt anger boil inside me, but before I could respond, he stood up. The sound of his chair against the marble echoed in the silence. "Watch your words, sister," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "The throne has its queen, and she was anointed before gods and men. Your attempt to destabilize her is treason." Morgana didn't back down. She rose as well, her eyes fixed on her brother. "Treason is putting a bastard on the throne while the rightful heir rots in exile. Treason is forgetting blood for lust. And treason, my dear brother, is what you have committed against our family, our lineage, our people." The murmur that ran through the room was like the buzzing of angry bees. I stood up too, and my voice, when it came out, surprised even me with its firmness. "If you question my position, Lady Morgana, then present your claim officially before the full council, before the people. Let them decide who deserves their loyalty. The crown is not won by birth but by actions, and my actions speak for themselves." She smiled, but it was a viper's smile. "With pleasure, Your Majesty. We shall see then if the people prefer pure blood or Cinderella stories." The trial was set for the full moon. It would be held in the great square, open to the people, transparent and final. The weeks leading up to it were the hardest of my life. Morgana worked tirelessly, gathering support, spreading rumors, planting doubts. I did the same, but I fought at a disadvantage. She had known these people forever, while I was an intruder who had risen too fast. There were nights when I doubted myself completely. Nights when I looked in the mirror and saw not a queen but an imposter. He noticed, he always noticed. He would pull me close, force me to look into his eyes. "You are my queen," he would say. "Not because I chose you, but because you became worthy of it. You transformed this kingdom, brought changes my family avoided for generations. The people love you not for your blood, but for your heart. And that, in the end, is worth more than any lineage." But the words, as comforting as they were, did not erase the fear, because I knew that if I lost that trial, I would not only lose the crown, I would lose everything. My family, my safety, possibly my life. And my children, my innocent babies, would pay for the sin of being born from me. On the eve of the trial, I received an unexpected visitor. It was the lady who had pushed me that first night, the one who had started it all. She was visibly uncomfortable, her hands trembling. "I came to ask for forgiveness, Your Majesty," she said, her voice broken, "and to offer my help." I looked at her with suspicion. "Why now?" I asked. "Why after all this?" "Because I've seen what you've done for this kingdom," she replied. "I've seen how you've protected the weak, how you've changed unjust laws, how you've brought hope where there was only resignation. And I realized I was wrong. I was blinded by pride and prejudice. And now, seeing Lady Morgana, seeing her cruelty disguised as nobility, I understand that you are exactly the queen we need." She offered me crucial information. Morgana wasn't just seeking the throne by birthright. She had made alliances with neighboring kingdoms, promising land and power in exchange for military support. If she won the trial, there would be no peace, there would be war. And the people who so loved the stability we had brought would be dragged into a conflict they did not want. On the morning of the trial, the square was packed. Thousands of people crowded together, some supporting Morgana, others supporting me, many just curious to see the outcome. When I stepped onto the platform, pregnant, dressed not in jewels and luxury but in purposeful simplicity, I heard a murmur ripple through the crowd. Morgana ascended on the other side, radiant in her crimson gown, the family crown glittering in her black hair. The trial began. Morgana presented her case with eloquence and passion. She spoke of lineage, of tradition, of the divine right of kings. She spoke of how I was an anomaly, a mistake, a stain on the dynasty's history. Her words were sharp, precise, devastating. I saw faces in the crowd turning against me, heard murmurs of agreement. When it was my turn, I stood for a long moment, just watching the people. Then I began to speak, and my voice, though trembling at first, gained strength. I will not speak of my blood because everyone knows what I am. I will not speak of my birth because I cannot change it. But I will speak of what I have done, of the laws I have changed to protect the weak, of the taxes I have reduced to ease the burden on the poor, of the schools I have opened, the hospitals I have built, the roads I have repaired. I will speak of every decision I have made, thinking not of myself, but of you. I walked to the edge of the platform, looking directly at the people. Do you think pure blood makes a good ruler? I say it does not. I say a good ruler is one who understands the people's pain, because they have felt that pain. One who knows hunger, because they have been hungry. One who values every crumb of dignity because they know what it's like to have none. I was not born with a silver spoon. I was born on the floor. And that is why I can rule for those who are still on the floor, because I see them, because I understand them, because I am them. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, slowly, one person began to applaud, then another, and another, until the entire square erupted in applause and shouts of support. I saw tears on faces, saw hope in eyes that had been empty before. And I saw on Morgana's face defeat. But she did not accept it gracefully. With a cry of fury, she drew a dagger hidden in her clothes and lunged at me. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the blade glinting in the sun, saw the hatred in her eyes, saw my death approaching. But before she could reach me, he was there. My king, my protector, placed himself between us. The dagger struck him in the shoulder and blood began to stain his white shirt. Chaos erupted. Guards seized Morgana, who screamed and fought like a possessed woman. I ran to him, my hands trying to staunch the blood, my heart beating so hard I thought it would explode. "No, no, no," I whispered, tears falling freely. "You can't leave me." "Not after everything?" He smiled even through the pain. "Never," he said, his voice weak but firm. "I will never leave you. We promised, remember? Together against the world." The doctors came, he was rushed away. The wound was deep but not fatal. While he recovered, Morgana was tried for attempted murder and treason. The council, seeing her true nature, voted unanimously for her permanent exile, this time to lands across the sea, from where she could not return. I watched her leave, chained, shouting curses that were lost in the wind. And I felt not victory, but sadness. Sadness for all that could have been different, for all the wrong choices that had led us there. He recovered slowly. I spent days by his side, caring for him, refusing to leave him for even a moment. And it was during those long nights, when the pain kept him from sleeping, that we finally talked about everything. About his fears, about his doubts, about the weight of the crown he had carried from such a young age. "You saved my life today," I said one night. "It's not the first time," he answered. "And it won't be the last, because you are my life now. Everything I am, everything I do is for you. For us." Our second child was born 2 months later. A girl with her father's dark eyes and a fierce determination already visible even in one so small. We named her Hope because that's what she represented. The hope for a better future, for a more just kingdom, for a dynasty built not on blood, but on love and choice. The following years brought more challenges, of course. There were droughts that tested our ability to govern. There were conflicts on the borders that required diplomacy and, at times, force. But through it all, we remained united. He and I, side by side, facing every storm as we had promised. I learned that being a queen was not about wearing a crown or sitting on a throne. It was about waking up every day and choosing to serve, choosing to fight, choosing to be worthy of the trust the people had placed in me. And there were hard days, days when the weight was almost unbearable. But there were also days of pure joy, of small victories that meant the world to someone, of smiles on faces that had no reason to smile before. Over time, the stories about my origin changed. They stopped being whispered as scandal and began to be told as inspiration. The queen who was born on the floor and rose to the throne, they said. The proof that anyone can change their destiny if they have enough courage. I became a symbol of something bigger than myself, and I learned to carry that weight with grace. But I never forgot where I came from. I continued to visit the poor districts, to talk with the common people, to listen to their stories. Because they were my people more than the nobles ever would be. And it was for them that I governed, for them that I fought. Every law I changed, every decree I signed, was with the thought of how to improve their lives. How to make the world a little less cruel for those born without privilege. And he, my king, my love, never stopped seeing me as he saw me that first night. With admiration, with desire, with something deep and unshakable that went beyond words. There were days when I still caught myself doubting, wondering if I deserved all of this. And he always seemed to know, always pulled me close and reminded me, "You deserve it not for who you were, but for who you chose to become." Our third child was born in the 7th year of my reign, a calm and thoughtful boy who from an early age showed an interest in books and knowledge. Looking at my 3 children, I saw in them the union of 2 worlds, the living proof that love can transcend any barrier, any prejudice. They would not be defined by their mother's blood or their father's title. They would be defined by their own choices, by who they decided to be. And when I look back now at the entire journey I have traveled, I feel gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that strengthened me, for the falls that taught me to get up, for the humiliations that taught me compassion. Because it was through all of this that I became who I am. Not despite the difficulties, but because of them. The floor still calls to me sometimes in nightmares where I go back to being that kneeling girl, covered in wine and shame. But I wake up in his arms, safe and protected, and I remember that that girl no longer exists. She is transformed into something stronger, more resilient, more complete. She is transformed into a queen, not just in title, but in essence. If there is one lesson I want to leave, one truth I learned with blood and tears, it is this. Your beginning does not determine your end. The circumstances of your birth do not define your worth. What defines you are your choices, your courage, your refusal to accept the limitations others try to impose. And above all, your ability to get up whenever the world tries to knock you down. So get up, stand tall, look the world in the eye and show who you really are. Because you are more than you imagine, stronger than you know, more capable than you believe. And the world needs to see that. The world needs people who refuse to stay on the floor, who choose to fight even when all seems lost. And if my story can inspire even one person to do that, then it was all worth it. Every tear, every pain, every moment of despair. Because in the end, we are not defined by where we start, but by how far we manage to go. And I have come far, much farther than that girl on the floor ever dreamed possible. But the journey doesn't end. It never really ends. Every day is a new chance to prove our worth, to make a difference, to be better. And that is what I continue to do, day after day, with him by my side and my people in my heart. It was in the 10th year of my reign that I faced perhaps the most personal challenge of all. It didn't come from outside, from enemies or conspiracies, but from within, from the deepest, most vulnerable place there is, motherhood. My eldest daughter, already 9 years old, began to ask questions about my origin, about why the other noble children whispered about her, about what it meant to be the granddaughter of a bastard. I knew this day would come, but when it did, I felt completely unprepared. It was an autumn afternoon, the golden leaves falling like tears from the sky. She came into my chambers, her little face too serious for a child, her father's dark eyes filled with a confusion that broke my heart. "Mom, is it true you were born in the kitchen?" she asked, and the brutal innocence of the question took my breath away. I sat down, pulled her onto my lap, and for the first time told my full story to someone I loved more than life itself. I told her about my mother, the maid with calloused hands. I told her about growing up in the back corridors, about being invisible, about the hunger that gnawed at my stomach while I watched other children waste food. I told her about the humiliation, about the spilled wine, about the cold marble floor. And I told her about choosing to stand up, about refusing to accept that my birth defined my destiny. She listened to me in silence, absorbing every word like water on dry earth. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then, with a wisdom that shouldn't exist in someone so young, she said, "So you're stronger than all of them. Because you chose to be queen, you weren't born one." And hot tears ran down my face. Tears of pain, but also of pride, because I realized my daughter understood something that many adults would never understand. That true strength comes not from birth, but from choice. But that conversation triggered something I didn't expect. She began to question everything around her, to see the injustices that had previously gone unnoticed by her childish eyes. She saw how the servants were treated, how the poor were ignored, how society was built on layers of privilege and contempt. And she decided, with the fierce determination she inherited from me and her father, that she wanted to change it. It started small. She insisted on eating with the servants, on learning their names, their stories. She shared her toys with the poor children she saw on the streets when we left the castle. And when the nobles complained, when they said she was lowering herself, she faced them with a courage that made me simultaneously proud and terrified. I am the granddaughter of a woman who was born on the floor and became a queen, she would say, her voice firm and clear. If she can do that, I can do anything. There was an incident that profoundly marked that period. During a banquet, a drunken noble made a comment about the royal family's origin, about how impure blood was contaminating the dynasty. He didn't know my daughter was there, hidden behind a column, watching as she always did. She came out of her hiding place, marched up to the man who was 3 times her size, and said in a voice that silenced the entire hall, "My grandmother had the blood of working people, honest people. People who build this kingdom with their own hands. What blood do you have? The blood of parasites who live off the work of others?" The silence that followed was absolute. The noble turned red with anger and humiliation. He tried to get up, perhaps to reprimand her, but before he could do anything, he was there. My king, my husband, materialized beside our daughter like a protective shadow. He placed his hand on her shoulder, a gesture that was both support and pride. "Did my daughter tell a lie?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. The noble swallowed hard, shook his head. "Then I suggest you reflect on your own words before you question the blood that runs in the veins of the future queen of this kingdom." That night, after we put the children to bed, we stayed up for hours talking about the future, about the kind of kingdom we wanted to leave for our children, about the changes we needed to make, about how to break the cycles of injustice that had existed for generations. And we realized that it wasn't enough for me to have reached the throne. We needed to use that power to fundamentally transform the structure of society. We started slowly, because changes that are too fast generate violent resistance. We created laws that protected workers, that guaranteed education for all, regardless of birth. We opened the court to people from all backgrounds, not just nobles. We established a system where merit was worth more than lineage. And with every change, we faced fierce opposition. Nobles who saw their privileges threatened, traditions that refused to die, prejudices so old they seemed etched in stone. There were attempts at sabotage, of course. Rumors spread, alliances formed against us, even a few conspiracies that we discovered and dismantled before they could cause real harm. But we continued, because we had learned that power without purpose is empty, that a crown without responsibility is just cold metal on your head. One of the most controversial changes was when I decided to open the castle once a month for public audiences. Anyone, no matter how poor or humble, could come to me with their concerns, their problems, their stories. The councillors told me it was dangerous, that I was exposing myself too much, that a queen should maintain distance. But I knew that if I distanced myself from the people, I would become exactly the kind of ruler I had always despised. It was during one of these audiences that I met a young woman who reminded me so much of myself that it hurt. She was perhaps 16, too thin, with mended clothes and eyes that carried ancient pain. She came to me trembling, barely able to speak. When she finally found her voice, she told a story that was painfully familiar. Raised without a mother, serving in a noble house, abused and humiliated, with no one to believe in her or protect her. I listened to every word, and with every sentence I felt my heart break and harden at the same time, because I saw in her what I could have been if fate had not placed me in the king's path. I saw all the women who hadn't had my luck, who remained on the floor because no one lifted them up. And in that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. I established a sanctuary within the castle, a place where women like her could seek refuge, protection, justice. I created laws that protected servants from abuse, that severely punished those in positions of power who took advantage of the vulnerable. And I offered her, and all those like her, a choice. Go back to the life they knew, or stay and learn, become something more. Many stayed. And I personally made sure they received education, training, opportunities they would never have had otherwise. I saw some of them become competent administrators, others teachers, others still advisors on my own council. And every time I saw one of them flourish, I remembered why it was all worth it. Why every battle, every scar, every tear had a purpose. My husband watched me do all this with that look I knew so well, that mix of admiration and something deeper that he rarely put into words. One night, after we visited the sanctuary together, he pulled me into his arms and whispered, "Do you know why I fell in love with you? It wasn't your beauty, though you are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. It wasn't your strength, though you are the strongest person I know. It was your ability to turn pain into purpose, to take every wound and transform it into healing for others. You didn't just survive, you decided to ensure that others wouldn't have to just survive. Those words sustained me through the following years, through every new challenge, every obstacle, every moment when exhaustion threatened to overcome me, because he was right. My journey was not just about me. It never was. It was about all the girls born in the wrong place, with the wrong blood, in the wrong circumstances. It was about proving that destiny is not written at birth, but in the choices we make every day. My daughter grew up watching all of this, absorbing every lesson. And when it was her turn to begin her own formal training as a future queen, she already knew more about ruling with compassion and justice than most nobles would learn in a lifetime. I saw in her the best of both of us, her father's strength and her mother's empathy, tempered with something uniquely hers, something fierce and brilliant and absolutely unstoppable. One day, years after that first difficult conversation, she came to me with a question. "Mom, do you regret anything?" she asked. I thought carefully before answering because I knew my words would have weight. "I regret the pain I caused people who didn't deserve it," I answered honestly. "I regret moments when I let pride speak louder than compassion. But I don't regret the path I chose. I don't regret fighting. I don't regret being here. Because if I weren't, you wouldn't exist. And you, my dear, are the proof that it was all worth it." She smiled, that smile that lit up even the darkest days, and said, "When I am queen, I will continue what you started. I will make this kingdom a place where it doesn't matter where you are born, but who you choose to be." And I felt my heart overflow with pride and hope, because I knew in that moment that my legacy was secure, that the changes I had fought so hard to implement would not die with me. Time continued its inexorable march. Wrinkles began to appear around my eyes, silver threads mixed with my dark hair. But each mark was a medal, each wrinkle a story, each white strand a victory won. I had lived, truly lived, in a way the girl on the floor had never imagined possible. And I continued to live each day a new page, each challenge a new opportunity to prove that choosing to stand up was the best decision I ever made. I hope you have felt the strength of this story as much as I felt living it. If something here resonated in your heart, if any word touched your soul, leave your comment telling your story, your struggles, your victories. We all have battles, we all have our moments on the floor, but we all also have the ability to get up. And together, by sharing our stories, we become stronger. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that inspire, that move, that remind us of the incredible strength that exists within each of us. Because these stories are for you, about you, and through you they gain life and meaning. Thank you for being here, for being part of this journey. Until the next story, and may you always remember, you deserve to be on your feet.